My name is Sarah. I'm 32 years old, and until 9 months ago, I believed I was the luckiest woman in Dallas. I remember the morning clearly because I had ironed my cream blouse the night before, the one my husband said made me look like someone who had her life together. I wore it to the bank. I had a 9 o'clock appointment with our loan officer, Mr. Henderson, to finalize the refinancing paperwork on our house. My husband was supposed to come with me. He texted at 8:47. Big site inspection. You can handle it, babe, you always do. I sat in that gray upholstered chair across from Mr. Henderson's desk and smiled like a woman who absolutely had her life together. Mr. Henderson was a soft-spoken man in his late 50s with silver hair and the kind of careful, deliberate movements that come from decades of delivering news good and bad from behind a desk. He typed something, scrolled, typed again. His coffee mug sat steaming near the edge of the desk. His hand stopped moving on the mouse. I noticed because he went very still. Not the stillness of someone concentrating, the stillness of someone who has just stepped on something unexpected in the dark. He looked at his screen. Then he looked at me. Then back at his screen. "Mrs. Calloway," he said. His voice had changed. It was slower, more careful, like he was choosing each word the way you'd choose your footing on ice. "I need to run something by my supervisor. It'll only take a moment. Please help yourself to coffee. The machine's just down the hall." He pushed back from his desk, adjusted his jacket, and walked out. He left his computer on. I sat still for about 4 seconds, then something pulled me forward. I don't know what to call it, instinct, dread, the same feeling you get when your phone rings at 2 a.m. I stood up and walked around the desk. I stood in front of his monitor. It was our mortgage refinancing file, split across 2 windows. On the left, our current loan information for the house on Birchwood Lane. On the right, a secondary property search result, flagged automatically by the bank's system because it was tied to my husband's social security number. 4417 Clementine Street, Garland, TX. Joint ownership, Ryan Calloway, and a second name, Melissa Hartfield. I had to read the name 3 times before my brain would accept it. Melissa Hartfield, because Melissa Hartfield was dead. My husband had told me so himself, 4 years ago, sitting in our kitchen with red eyes, his hands wrapped around a mug of tea he never drank. She had been his college girlfriend, his first love. She died in a hiking accident in the mountains of Colorado, a trail that crumbled, a fall, no one nearby. He couldn't even say her name for the first 2 years without his voice breaking. I held him. I comforted him. I thought I was loving a man who had already lost so much. The property record showed a purchase date of 3 years ago, 11 months after he and I got married. I walked back around the desk and sat down in my chair. When Mr. Henderson returned, he looked at my face and seemed to understand immediately that whatever he had hoped to manage quietly was no longer possible. He sat down slowly. "Mrs. Calloway," he began. "I saw it," I said. He nodded. He closed his laptop gently, as if lowering a lid on something that couldn't be put back. He told me there was a discrepancy, that the secondary property had its own mortgage, separate from ours, with payments drawn from an account I had no access to. He said a few more things I didn't fully absorb because the sound of my own heartbeat had gotten very loud. I thanked him. I picked up my purse. I walked out of the bank into the Texas heat, and I sat in my car in the parking lot for 11 minutes before I trusted myself to drive. Melissa Hartfield was alive. My husband owned a house with her, and whatever life existed inside that house on Clementine Street, I had been paying for half of it without knowing. I didn't go home. I drove to the public library because property records are public, and because I needed to think somewhere that wasn't our house, which suddenly felt like a stage set. I sat at one of the computer terminals and pulled up the County Appraisal District records. The address came up immediately. The house had been purchased for $260,000. Ryan Calloway and Melissa Hartfield listed as co-owners. The parcel record showed the lot size, the year it was built, the square footage, perfectly ordinary information that outlined the shape of a life I hadn't known existed. I wrote the address in my notebook. My handwriting looked surprisingly steady. Garland was about 40 minutes east of us. I drove there in the kind of focused silence I imagine surgeons must feel completely calm on the surface, every sense underneath running at full speed. I followed the GPS down streets I had never traveled, past strip malls and churches and neighborhood parks until the voice told me I had arrived. Clementine Street was a quiet, tree-lined block of ranch-style homes. The kind of street where people put flags on their porches and know their neighbors' dogs by name. Number 4417 had a pale yellow door and a small garden bed along the front walkway with pink begonias that someone had recently watered. A minivan sat in the driveway. A pair of small sneakers, pink with Velcro straps, had been left on the porch. A child's sneakers. I parked 2 houses down. I sat there for a long time. A woman came out of the front door. She was carrying a laundry basket against her hip, and she set it on the porch railing and started folding. She was maybe 30, with dark hair pulled into a ponytail. She was wearing a loose floral top, the kind of top that drapes softly over a rounded belly. She was pregnant. 4, maybe 5 months. Ryan's jacket was draped over the porch railing next to the laundry. The dark gray one with the collar I'd turned up 100 times before he walked out the door. I drove home. I fed the cat. I made dinner. I set 2 plates on the table, and when my husband came in at 6:45, smelling like sawdust and the particular cedar cologne he'd worn since I met him, I watched his face for the thing I now knew was there. He kissed my cheek. He asked about the refinancing. I told him it went fine, and that Mr. Henderson needed a few more documents. He said okay and sat down and ate his pasta and told me about the site inspection, and I watched his mouth form every word of every lie and thought, "You have been doing this for 3 years. You have been sitting at this table and doing this for 3 years." That night I lay beside him and stared at the ceiling while he slept, and I thought about those pink Velcro sneakers on the porch. A little girl. He had a little girl on Clementine Street, and every time he left our house for a job site or a client dinner or one of his weekend inspections that run long, I might just stay near the site, he was going home to her. I didn't sleep. I made a plan instead. The next morning, after his truck pulled out of the driveway, I changed into jeans and a plain blue top. I printed a stack of fake community survey forms from a template I found online. I teach high school English. I know how to make a document look official. I borrowed a clipboard from my school bag. I put on my reading glasses, the ones I rarely wear because my prescription is mild. Then I drove back to Clementine Street. I knocked on the door of 4417 at 10:15 in the morning. She answered, holding a sippy cup and wearing a tired expression that transformed into polite surprise when she saw the clipboard. Up close, she was younger than I thought. Soft features, honest eyes, a small smear of what looked like yogurt on her sleeve that she hadn't noticed, beautiful in a way that looked entirely unintentional. "Hi there," I said, and my voice came out completely steady. "I'm with the Dallas Regional Community Housing Survey. We're speaking with residents in this area about neighborhood services and satisfaction. It would only take about 10 minutes, and we have a $10 gift card for anyone who participates." She looked past me at the quiet street. Then she stepped back and opened the door wider. "Sure," she said. "Come on in. Emma's just having her snack, so it might be a little loud." Emma. The little girl's name was Emma. The inside of the house was warm and cluttered with the particular chaos of a toddler's domain: foam floor mats, board books stacked in a basket, a finger-painted drawing taped to the wall that said "Datey" in unsteady letters. My chest went tight. I followed her into the living room and sat in the armchair she pointed to, and I set my clipboard on my knee and told myself to breathe. On the bookshelf along the wall, between a baby monitor and a stack of parenting books, there was a framed photo. Ryan, standing on a beach at sunset, holding a little girl Emma, maybe 18 months old in the picture up in the air above his head, both of them laughing. His face was open and unguarded, in a way I had not seen in a very long time. He looked, I thought, genuinely happy. On the hook by the front door, 2 coats. A woman's puffy vest, and my husband's dark gray jacket. A second one, identical to the one in our closet. He had bought 2. Emma wandered in from the kitchen, assessed me with enormous brown eyes, decided I was acceptable, and went back to her crackers. The woman sat across from me and folded her hands over her belly. "Sorry," she said, nodding downward. "Second trimester energy." I could fall asleep sitting up. "Congratulations," I said. The word tasted like ash. "Boy or girl?" "A boy." She smiled. Finally, some balance. I asked her the survey questions. She answered them. "How long have you lived here? 3 years. Do you have concerns about local infrastructure? The speed bumps on the main road need work. Would you say this neighborhood feels safe? Absolutely. That's why we chose it. We. She said we. Your husband work nearby? I asked, keeping my eyes on the clipboard. He's in real estate development, she said. He travels a lot. Which is hard with a toddler, especially now. She patted her belly. But he's a good man. He works so hard for us. A pause. His first marriage was really difficult. His ex-wife had a lot of issues, jealousy, controlling behavior. The divorce took forever. It really affected him. But he's been so much calmer since we've been together. I pressed the pen against the clipboard hard enough to leave a mark. His first marriage. His ex-wife. I was his ex-wife. I was sitting in his other house, being told I was his ex-wife by the woman he was also married to, the woman he had told me was dead, the woman who was now carrying his second child and raising his first. I'm sure he's very lucky to have you, I said. I left 10 minutes later with her name. She'd offered it freely at the start. Melissa Hartfield. She'd kept her last name. Probably because Ryan had told her they weren't legally married. Probably because there were so many things Ryan had told her that weren't true. I sat in my car on Clementine Street and looked at the pink begonias by the door for a long time. Then I drove to the county clerk's office. Our marriage certificate is a simple document. Cream paper, official seal, both our names, the date. November 14th, 4 years ago. I had it certified that afternoon, 2 copies. Raised seal, the real thing. I went home and I found our joint tax returns from the past 3 years. I found Ryan's cell phone bill, which I had access to because it ran through my name. I sat at the kitchen table with everything spread out in front of me, and I looked at the pattern that had always been there. The receipts from Garland, the charges at a children's clothing store, small amounts, routine, that I'd assumed were client gifts. The weekend trips that lined up, I now realized, with Emma's birthday. Her first birthday. Her second. I had bought the birthday cake for that child without knowing it. That night, Ryan came home. He kissed my cheek again. I handed him a plate and sat across from him and watched him eat and said very little, and he noticed nothing, because he had not been paying close enough attention to me in a very long time. 3 days later, on a Tuesday morning, I drove back to Clementine Street. I knocked on the yellow door. When Melissa opened it, the surprise on her face shifted quickly into something warmer recognition, the uncomplicated pleasure of seeing a familiar person. "Oh, from the survey," she said. "Did you need something else?" "I do," I said. "Can I come in?" She stepped back. Emma was in the kitchen eating breakfast. The house smelled like toast and coffee. Melissa led me to the living room and turned to face me, and something in my expression made her smile fade. I opened my bag. I set both certified copies of my marriage certificate on the coffee table between us. "My name isn't Janet from the housing survey," I said. "My name is Sarah Calloway, Ryan Calloway's wife." She stared at the certificates. She stared at my name. She stared at the date. "No," she said. Her voice was a whisper. "He told me he said you were divorced. He said the marriage ended before we—" She stopped. "He said you were unstable, that you stalked him, that he had a restraining order." I reached into my bag again. I set down printouts from Ryan's own cell phone bill calls to Melissa's number, calls to mine, side by side across 4 years. I set down a photograph I had taken from our shared cloud backup, Ryan and me at his cousin's wedding 8 weeks ago. His arm around me, both of us in formal clothes, his face turned toward mine. I set down our joint bank statements from last month. Last week, Melissa picked up the wedding photo. She looked at it for a long time. Then she set it down, and the sound it made on the table was very small, and she covered her mouth with both hands, and she did not make a sound for what felt like a full minute. "Emma," she finally said, her voice cracking on the single word. "Emma calls him Daddy," her eyes filled with tears that didn't fall. "He put that crib together. He read her stories. He's been here every week for 3 years, and he told me he said you were." She shook her head. "I would never have. I don't do that. I would never have been with a married man. I thought I was so sure." "I know," I said. And I meant it. Because I had known Melissa for all of 3 visits, and I already knew this about her, that she was a person who meant what she said and believed what she was told by someone she trusted, just like me. "I know you didn't know," She pressed her palms flat against her knees. Her breathing was getting unsteady. She looked down at her belly, then up at me, and the terror on her face was not anger, not defensiveness, it was the terror of someone watching the floor disappear beneath them. "My insurance," she said suddenly. "Ryan set it up. He said it was through his company's policy." Her voice was rising. "The prenatal appointments. The delivery. If he lied about, oh God, is the insurance real?" "I don't know yet," I said, because I didn't. "But we're going to find out." She stood up abruptly, too fast. She grabbed the arm of the sofa and her face went the color of old paper. I feel she started. And then Emma came in from the kitchen with her plate and said, "Mama?" And Melissa's legs gave out, and she sat back down hard and said she needed a minute. She needed water. And I went to the kitchen for the water, and when I came back she was breathing in shallow, rapid pulls, her hand on her stomach, her eyes fixed on nothing. "Something's wrong," she said. "It hurts. It's different. It's not I need to go to the hospital." I called 911. I held her hand while we waited. Emma climbed into her mother's lap and patted her face with a tiny palm, saying, "Mama, Mama, Mama," in the rhythmic, devoted way of a 2-year-old who has no idea what is happening but knows she is needed. In the ambulance, Melissa's grip on my hand was so tight my knuckles went white. "Don't call Ryan," she said. "Please. Whatever you do, don't call him." And then, quieter, "How did you stand it? Loving someone and not knowing any of this. How did you not know?" I didn't have a good answer. That's what guilt does, I think. It makes people more attentive in smaller spaces and more careless in larger ones. Ryan brought me flowers on Valentine's Day. He remembered my mother's birthday. He kept all the small rituals so perfectly that I never thought to look at the large shape of things. At the hospital, a nurse asked if I was family. Melissa turned her head toward me and there was a question in her eyes that was also somehow a plea. "She's my sister," I said. It was the second lie I had ever told for her. It felt like the beginning of something. The doctor said the baby was fine. The placenta had shifted slightly. Triggered by stress, they would monitor her, keep her overnight, prescribe rest. The baby's heartbeat was strong and regular, the nurse said, pointing to the monitor, and Melissa cried when she heard it. Not the quiet, dignified tears from earlier. She cried like something had broken open. Like all the grief she had been holding upright with both hands finally had permission to fall. I called my sister to pick up Emma. Then I sat in the chair beside Melissa's bed and we talked for 3 hours, the real kind of talking, where you stop managing how you sound and just say the thing. She had met Ryan at a work event. He'd been charming and attentive and sad in that specific way that makes you want to fix someone. He'd told her about his traumatic marriage, his controlling ex-wife, the difficult divorce that had cost him years of his life. He had been so convincingly wounded that she had spent the first year of their relationship being careful around his edges, taking care of him, making space for his pain. Same story, different woman, same man, performing the same grief, to keep 2 lives from touching. "He told me you were the one who kept the house," she said. "He said you got everything in the divorce and he had to start over." "There was no divorce," I said. "We still own that house together. Although I'm starting to suspect I may not own much of it anymore." I was right about that. The next morning, I went to our bank. I sat across from a different loan officer this time and asked to see everything, every account, every linked credit card, every line of credit taken out in the last 3 years. The numbers told a story that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with control and cowardice. Ryan had a second credit card I hadn't known about. He had taken a cash advance against a home equity line on our house that he had opened 18 months ago. He had also, I would later learn, told his business partners that I was aware of and had approved a refinancing deal that redirected $70,000 out of the company's operating fund. He had never invested in the markets the way he'd told me. The good year in the portfolio he had celebrated over dinner last spring was a lie. We had almost nothing. I called a lawyer from the parking lot. I called my mother. I went home and walked through every room slowly, looking at our life the way an appraiser looks at a property with clear eyes, without attachment, trying to understand what is real and what is only the appearance of something real. Ryan came home at 7. He set his keys on the hook. He took off his jacket, the gray one, identical to the one on Melissa's porch, which I now understood was part of a system as deliberate as everything else he'd built. He looked at me across the kitchen and said, Long day. You okay? I said, sit down. He sat. He looked at the marriage certificate on the table, and Melissa's address printed from the property record, and his cell phone bill with 2 years of calls highlighted in yellow, and he went very quiet. I didn't shout. I had planned a speech, and I didn't give it. I just looked at him and said, Melissa is in the hospital. Your son is fine. Emma is with my sister. I know everything, Ryan. All of it. He sat for a long time without speaking. Then he said, Grace, I can explain. My name is Sarah. He called me Grace. I think that was when I fully understood that Ryan lived in so many versions of the same lie that he had lost track of which one he was in. He corrected himself immediately, his face resetting, but it was too late. The mask had slipped just enough. I could see the mechanism behind it. I'm filing for divorce, I said. I've already spoken to a lawyer. Do not move money. Do not touch the accounts. Do not go to the hospital. I stood up. You should probably find somewhere to stay tonight. He left. He drove away, and I stood at the window and watched the headlights disappear, and then I sat on the kitchen floor because my legs would not hold me anymore, and I pressed my back against the cabinet and breathed until the shaking stopped. The next morning, I got a call from Melissa. Her voice was steadier. The baby was fine. She was being discharged. Would it be strange if she trailed off? I'll pick you up, I said. I brought Emma with me. Emma sat in the back seat of my car in the borrowed car seat and held a stuffed elephant and looked solemnly out the window at passing trucks the whole way there. I signed her in at the hospital desk as a family member and felt the words settle into something like accuracy. When Melissa came out with her discharge paperwork and saw Emma reach up for her from the stroller my sister had sent along, she pulled her daughter in and held her so long and so tightly that people in the hallway moved around them quietly, understanding without being told that something important was happening. On the way back to Clementine Street, Melissa said, He hasn't called. I know, I said. He probably won't. What does that mean for Emma? For the baby? Her voice was steady but careful, like she was carrying something fragile and didn't want to jostle it. It means we figure it out ourselves, I said. Which we're going to do. She looked at me across the car. Why are you helping me? I can't understand why you would help me. I thought about that for a moment. Because I've been in that hospital chair before, I said. Not physically. But I know what it feels like to be in a room where everything you thought was true just isn't, and I wouldn't have wanted to be alone in that room. I kept my eyes on the road. Also, Emma called Ryan Daddy. That makes her adjacent to me somehow. I don't know what the word is. But I'm not walking away from it. Melissa pressed her fingers to her eyes. She didn't cry. She was running low on tears and running high on something more useful, the particular clarity that comes after a devastation so total that there's nothing left to protect. Ryan did not call Emma. He did not call Melissa. He called me twice, both times when he knew I would be at school, and left voicemails that started with, I just want you to understand my side of things, and trailed into the kind of vague, unanchored language that people use when they are trying to apologize without admitting anything specific. I didn't return the calls. My lawyer handled his lawyer, and the picture that emerged over the following weeks was grimmer than I'd expected and exactly as bad as I'd feared. The house in Garland was mortgaged nearly to its value. Our house in Dallas had an equity line drawn to the maximum. Ryan's company was under investigation for the misdirected funds. The business partners had already known something was wrong. The portfolio didn't exist. The good year hadn't happened. We had spent 4 years building what I believed was a future, and he had spent 4 years spending it. I sold my car and put the money into a joint account that Melissa and I opened together, her idea, and a good one. We used it for Emma's daycare and for the prenatal appointments and for a new crib, because Melissa had quietly taken every object in the house that was Ryan's and put it into 3 boxes on the curb. The boxes were gone by morning. Someone always takes things left on the curb. I slept on her couch for 6 weeks while the divorce proceedings tied up our house. She brought me coffee every morning without asking and left it on the end table next to the couch, and I graded papers in the small, warm circle of the living room lamp while Emma slept and Melissa rested, and it was one of the strangest and most peaceful periods of my life. We didn't talk about Ryan very much. We talked about everything else. She had studied to be a nurse, but had stopped working when Emma was born, and I told her the hospitals in Garland were short-staffed and she should look into it, and she looked into it. I taught her how to read a balance sheet and she taught me how to make her grandmother's enchiladas, and we watched old movies on Friday nights, and one evening I walked past the nursery and found her sitting in the rocking chair with her hand on her belly and her eyes closed, and her face had the expression of someone who has decided to be all right, not because things are all right, but because the alternative is no longer acceptable. I respected that expression. I recognized it. I had seen it in my own mirror. My divorce was finalized on a Thursday in March, and the following Saturday morning I took Emma to the park while Melissa had her prenatal appointment. Emma held my hand on the path and pointed at every dog that passed and said its name with complete confidence regardless of whether she was right. That one was Max. That one was Biscuit. That one, a large and dignified golden retriever, was Pickles. We sat on a bench near the sandbox. Emma was deeply focused on transferring sand from one bucket to another, which appeared to be the primary creative project of her afternoon. The sky was the specific, saturated blue that Texas does in spring, and the trees along the path were tipped with new green, and I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't realized was still tight. A man sat down on the far end of the bench and opened a book. He had a young boy with him, maybe 7 or 8, who immediately ran to the jungle gym with the focused energy of someone who had been in a car for too long. A few minutes later, the boy came back. "Dad, the ladder's wet." The man looked up from his book. "Then use the steps. The steps are boring. Then be bored." He said it without any irritation, with the particular even tone of someone who has had this category of conversation many times and finds it quietly enjoyable. The boy considered this, apparently decided his father had a point, and went back to the jungle gym. The man glanced sideways at me. "Sorry, we have opinions about efficiency. She's currently moving all of this sand into that bucket," I said, nodding toward Emma, "so that she can move it back." "So I understand." He smiled. He had the kind of face that is improved by smiling crow's feet, laugh lines, a tiredness behind the eyes that didn't reach his expression. He introduced himself as Connor. His son was Lucas. They lived in the neighborhood. They came here most Saturdays. We talked for a while about small things, the traffic on the main road, the good taco place on the corner that he was surprised I hadn't tried yet, whether Emma's creative sand methodology was art or engineering. He asked how old she was, and I said she was almost 3, and then I said, "She's and paused because I still didn't have a clean word for what Emma was to me. "I'm close with her mother," I said. "I help out." He nodded. He didn't ask for more, which I noticed. Before Lucas dragged him away to the parking lot, Connor said something that surprised me. He said, "You're very patient with her, Emma. You didn't check your phone once." He said it simply as an observation, not a compliment, and somehow that made it land differently. Most adults in the sandbox check their phones. "I'm trying to be better at paying attention," I said. He held my gaze for just a moment too long. "Me too," he said, and then Lucas had his arm, and they were gone. Melissa was home when we got back, standing in the kitchen making lunch with the particular careful movements of a woman who is taking very good care of a body she has decided to trust again. She looked at Emma's sand-covered shoes and raised an eyebrow at me. "Productive morning?" she said. "We moved a lot of sand," I said. "Also, I met someone in the park." She turned from the stove. Someone? I don't know yet." I took Emma's shoes off at the door and set them on the mat. He was just a normal person, paying attention. Melissa looked at me for a moment the way she sometimes did, like she was doing a quiet calculation, measuring something she was glad to find was there. Then she turned back to the stove. "Good," she said simply. That night, Emma fell asleep, holding my hand during her bedtime story. I stayed for a few minutes after her breathing slowed, watching her face in the dark, that absolute, uncomplicated surrender that children have to sleep. The trust of it. She had Ryan's brow line. I had learned to separate that fact from the feeling. The fact was neutral. The feeling was mine to choose. In the living room, Melissa was sitting on the couch with her feet up, her hands resting on her belly, the lamp making a small warm circle around her. She looked up when I came in. "She out?" "Out," I said. I sat in the armchair across from her. We were quiet for a while. Outside, a car went past. Someone on the street was mowing a lawn, even though it was almost 8, and the sound was distant and somehow peaceful. "I've been thinking," Melissa said, "about going back to school in the fall. Finishing the nursing program. There's an evening track." She looked at me. If it helps with the timing of things, would you consider staying here longer? You could take the second bedroom. Emma would probably take another year to agree to this, but eventually she would stop calling it the monster room. I laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that comes before you've decided to laugh. She calls it the monster room? She's going through a phase. Melissa pressed her lips together, suppressing a smile. She also calls the mailbox the message tree and the vacuum cleaner Steve. I'm not sure who Steve is. I looked at this woman across the small living room, this woman I had found at the other end of a lie, who I had not chosen and could not have predicted, who had made me coffee every morning for 6 weeks without asking, and who was now offering me the second bedroom and the chance to watch Emma grow up and call the mailbox the message tree. I thought about the house on Birchwood Lane, which had been sold in the settlement and which I had not once missed. I thought about the version of my life I had been promised and had lost and had stopped mourning somewhere in the long, patient weeks of sitting in this living room. I thought about Connor in the park, saying, "Me too. I'll take the room," I said. "And I'm painting over whatever color it is in there." "It's orange," Melissa said. Ryan picked it. She paused. "Paint it whatever you want." The road that had brought me to that couch, in that house, in that life, it had started in a bank, at a desk, with a man who stepped out of the room and left his computer on. It had been the worst thing and the realest thing that had ever happened to me. I had walked into that bank as a woman who believed her life was settled, and I had walked out as someone who understood, finally and permanently, that settled is not the same as solid. Solid things have been tested. Solid things have been broken and repaired and have broken and been repaired again. Settled things are only waiting. I was not waiting anymore. I was living in it, the actual, inconvenient, tender, real shape of things. A borrowed room with a daughter who wasn't mine, calling the mailbox the message tree. A friend who brought me coffee I didn't ask for. A man in a park who paid attention. The slow, daily work of building something true. Some nights I still think about what it meant that a bank officer stepped out of a room and left his screen on. Whether it was an accident, whether he knew, somewhere underneath his professional composure, that the woman in the gray upholstered chair deserved to know what was on that screen. Whether there are small mercies that arrive dressed up as disasters, I have decided to believe it was a mercy. I have decided to believe that the hardest deliveries are not always the worst ones. That sometimes what feels like losing everything is just the weight of the wrong things finally falling away. Emma is 3 now. She has started calling me Aunt Sarah, which she pronounces Ah Sarah, and which I have decided is exactly the right word for exactly the right thing.